Cilliers Brink is the leader of the DA caucus in Tshwane. We're going to follow the Tshwane story with him because if you recall, he used to be the mayor and there was a lot of progress made. He's, determined to make sure that that progress does not get unraveled. He joins us this morning for an update. And you're in your car, Cilliers. So where exactly are you right now?
Good morning, Alec. Yes, I'm joining you from Thabazimbi, which is a municipality just north of Brits. It's in Limpopo. And it's one of those hung councils where, because no party got a majority and no coalition could govern effectively, the entire council was dissolved. So we are here to do some last-minute canvassing because on Wednesday, the 51,000 voters of Thabazimbi have to vote for a new council and hope that this time it is not coalition chaos and that somebody gets a big enough majority to actually govern.
That's an interesting point. So if you've got a council where nobody is in control or no grouping is together to give you more than 50%, the option then is to dissolve. You would have thought that this might have happened elsewhere in the country, or has it?
It has happened in a few places. In fact, it happened in Tshwane, just at the tail end of the 2016-2021 term of office. No party had a majority there, no coalition had a majority. And ANC and EFF councillors kept on walking out of council meetings. Now, that gave the Gauteng provincial government a pretext to invoke what is called Section 139 1C of the Constitution, which is it's the most intrusive form of intervention. You dissolve the city council and run a re-election. And at that stage, all of that happened during the COVID-19 lockdown. So you couldn't have an election. It's meant to happen within 90 days, and it ended up being 7 months of administration. And Alec, what we find is that when this section of the Constitution is invoked, very often the result isn't much different from the hung council that happened before. And those administrators that step in between the dissolution and the election often do more damage than actually helping the municipality. But we are a young coalition country, and hopefully the voters take a cue, especially in respect of the role of these smaller parties that don't really stand for anything, but that sort of trade their votes between the ANC and the DA.
So I know we're not going to talk about Thabazimbi, but it is interesting that you're there right now. Just tell us what campaigning means, exactly what you do, and how close are things in that town council right now?
So the interesting thing is Thabazimbi, until quite recently, had a DA mayor. There were two DA mayors in Limpopo after 2021, Modemole Mokgopong, where my colleague who's passed away since then, Madeleine van Staden was the mayor. And then here in Thabazimbi had a DA mayor, sort of a titular mayor because, with such a hung council, it's pretty much impossible to get anything done. You are sabotaged and undermined at every turn. But the challenge really is in an election campaign is to broaden your base as much as possible to convince people of your case. And then once you have your voters identified, you have to get them out. You have to turn them out. And that's where elections are won. It's very often the party whose supporters are the most motivated and who have the biggest reason to turn out to vote on election day that win the election. It's not just here in South Africa. In the United States, I think it's a similar phenomenon where elections are won on turnout. It is pretty close, something like 17 parties. MK will be contesting this by-election in Thabazimbi for the first time. Obviously not their natural bailiwick, being here in Limpopo instead of KwaZulu-Natal. But it should be interesting, and hopefully the people of Thabazimbi get some order out of the chaos of coalitions.
But how close is it? What does your party, for instance, how many seats do you have, and what are you aiming for?
So it's in the range of between 10 and 20% of the seats that we're aiming for. But because no party really is stronger than, say, 30 or 35%. It is very much a coalition situation. And so, there's no chance of us winning an absolute majority in Thabazimbi. The demographics are just not, it's not suited to the type of place that we would win with a majority. It's not Paarl or Stellenbosch or Midvaal. But the key is going to be to put together a coalition that has a measure of coherence and that has a majority, because without those two things, a measure of ideological coherence and a majority in the council, it becomes really difficult for any mayor to get anything done.
But surely with the government of national unity, there would be natural partners, or has that not come down to Thabazimbi?
Well, you'd think so. The problem is that the factions of the ANC and the local barons are very often on a frolic of their own. They've got their own agendas. It's about control of local resources. It's not about growing the economy and steering the country away from a fiscal cliff and, creating the kind of future that we would all want in South Africa, a country to lift the poor into the middle class. For many of the local guys and ANC factions, it's not about that at all. Now, I have to be careful because I don't know much about Limpopo ANC politics, but what I do know is that back in Gauteng, the local ANC leaders, of course, did everything in their power to prevent a kind of unity government from being formed, not just in the province, but also in the metros. And I suspect the motive is exactly that. It's about the control of resources. It's about putting mayors in place that don't bother with pesky things like value for ratepayers' money and balancing the books and clamping down on corruption, because if you do those things, you might end up decimating the ANC's resources and the network that holds the party together in these localities.
So going back to Gauteng and in particular to Tshwane, when you guys were there, when you were still the mayor, I can recall you saying, although Action SA had swapped sides, they aren't going to find that what they are telling the voters that they are going to be able to do, that in fact they will be able to do. In other words, it's a little bit like Tom Friedman when he wrote in, I think it was either The Earth is Flat or The Lexus and the Olive Tree, that politicians have got a golden straitjacket, and that's called money. And
yes,
money is a hard thing. You can't just create it. You can't just spend that which you don't have. Eventually, you run out of it. It does appear from the announcement that we have seen from the Action SA mayor, supported by the EFF and the ANC in your old hot seat, that they are realizing this pretty quickly now.
Yeah, that's the reality check. About 2 weeks ago, BizNews published a piece that I'd written in which I explained that Tshwane finds itself in a vice grip. On the one hand, you have all of these ANC-aligned unions clamoring for historical salary increases, which, when I was the mayor and our multi-party coalition was in charge, we concluded that the city does not, in fact, have the money to pay those increases. Tshwane is still in financial distress, and getting out of it involves making some pretty tough decisions. So the council resolved, it was obviously at my initiative, but I didn't decide as the mayor. The mayor doesn't have that kind of power. But we resolved to seek exemption from the bargaining council on salary increases in 2021 before I became mayor, and then in 2023 once again. And Alec, as you might recall, that unleashed a massive, violent strike that lasted about 3 months, probably the longest municipal strike in the history of the country. About 10 waste removal trucks were torched, people were intimidated. One of the employees was shot and almost died. I remember visiting in hospital and saying to him, well, thank you for continuing to work in these circumstances. And that was all about the 2023 salary increase. And, the irony of the matter is that the ANC then in opposition and Action SA, then a partner of the DA, had both voted in favor of foregoing the salary increase. But when they brought us to a fall with Action SA switched sides to the ANC, the big expectation, especially from the ANC aligned SA Municipal Workers Union, was that the city would not change its position and pay these increases, or at least reach a settlement on the dispute favorable to the unions. And what I warned about 2 weeks ago is that if that were to happen, and there were many indications that that was going to happen, Tshwane would not be in a position to reach a settlement with Eskom, because if you don't pay off the Eskom debt, which is after salaries your second biggest operational expense, then the city won't regain its creditworthiness and then won't be able to borrow money to replenish infrastructure. An interesting thing happened yesterday. The city announced that it was not going to abandon the labor court case. It was pushing ahead not to pay salary increases, despite all of the clamoring and expectation. And Alec, no coincidence, on the same day, it was announced that the city had reached a settlement agreement with Eskom. And as I had warned, those two things could not have, you can't pay salary increases and reach a deal with Eskom. So it's a good thing for the city. And as you quite rightly pointed out, the numbers force you into a position. And to the city's credit, they haven't tried to deny reality yet.
This is really interesting for people on the outside that you've joined the dots for us here. Clearly, where you were going under your administration was bringing back disciplines, financial disciplines that are imposed on all politicians and indeed on any enterprise, including a Metro Council. The Action SA grouping appeared to believe that they didn't have to follow those disciplines, and now they're being forced to do so. So I guess the big question is, are we going to see another 3-month strike in Tshwane when the municipal workers realize that they aren't going to get those salary increases?
Well, let me just address the first thing that you said. As Mario Cuomo, who was the governor of New York, said back in the 80s, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. It's easy to make politics of difficult decisions and then to come up with slogans like just pay the workers. And both the ANC and Action SA were guilty of that. When I was the mayor, Action SA tried to pressure me in the middle of the strike to reach a settlement. And I was saying to the guys, we can talk, but we can't talk while trucks are burning in the streets. That will simply destroy labor relations. It will encourage violence, and it will deepen the problems and the very causes of Tshwane's financial distress. So yes, indeed, government does impose a reality, and Action SA is not a party that I think has got core beliefs. They operated essentially opportunistically, and now reality has forced them into a particular position, and the same is true of the ANC. I don't think that we'll see another strike. There is, of course, the possibility that the city could lose the case in the labor court. The case is based on the finances of the city, and I believe we have pretty much a very strong case, because if you're not making enough money, if you have Eskom beating down your door, and if you've had the benefit in the hands of workers of historical salary increases outside of the main collective agreement, as what happened in Tshwane in 2020. In 1 year, in fact, the salary bill increased by 2.6 billion rand. And obviously, that was to the benefit of the employees of the city and to the great disadvantage of the residents, the ratepayers who have to foot the bill. So that's the very strong case in the labor court. But you never know how these things can go. There are no guarantees in litigation. I only hope that the city would make the best case possible. With our city manager, Johan Metler, who we appointed, I believe that will be the case. But there are a great deal of uncertainties, and even the settlement with Eskom is potentially a poison chalice. If you can remain disciplined, if you can stick to the payments, it will be a good thing. But if you can't, like any settlement with a creditor, there's an acceleration clause, and it could become much worse than it was.
Just explain that, if you would, the Eskom settlement. How much debt is owing, and how long is it going to take to repay that debt?
Yeah, so in this piece that I wrote and that BizNews published, I explained the causes of this Eskom debt. And Alec, what essentially happened in Tshwane is that as the city collected less and less money and had to pay on expenditures that weren't budgeted, such as salary increases outside of the collective agreement, as well as the damage done by the administration that was imposed in the city. So the city started losing access to long-term funding for capital projects and so forth. It was a credit crunch. And that is what happens in most of these dysfunctional municipalities. You start using Eskom like a bank. So instead of paying Eskom on time, you don't pay Eskom. You use that money to pay salaries and other operational expenses, and that accumulates. And it's really, really difficult once you've fallen behind on Eskom, once you're in that position, to get out of it. And the irony is that for you to restore the finances of a city such as Tshwane, you have to pay Eskom, you have to settle it, because until you do, you don't have creditworthiness. So what happened in Tshwane was that Eskom instituted litigation. The matter was referred to mediation. And at that time, I said to Johan Metler, we have to strike a deal with Eskom. We have to have a payment plan, because it's not just about keeping the sheriff of the court at bay. It's about the long-term financial sustainability of the city and our ability to deliver capital projects and so forth. And so what has happened is a deal has been struck. The arrears on the Eskom debt has to be paid in the next 5 years. So in exchange for that, Eskom has written off the interest on the arrears. So there's about a 4.5 billion amount in arrears, less the interest of about 800 or 900 million. That leaves you with about 3.9 billion that has to be settled by payment plan. But the writing off of the debt is conditional that Tshwane meets the monthly installments. And so it's not just a great deal, it requires that Tshwane continues with improving its collections, with reducing the extent of the debtors book. And that means more unpopular policies. When I was mayor, or my predecessor, in fact, started a program, it's essentially debt collection and credit control, called Tshwane Yatima. Means we'll put off the lights if you don't pay. And in many places, that becomes unpopular politics. We were able to sustain it, and the results showed. But unless the new ANC-led coalition in Tshwane continues with that, it won't be able to meet those Eskom payments. And if it doesn't, Eskom then has the option to say, oh no, we're no longer writing off arrears. Plus, there's probably going to be some kind of an acceleration clause, as you get in these settlement agreements, which means if Tshwane doesn't stick to its side of the deal, then Eskom can go to court and get a judgment, whereas before they struggled to do so because you have to do all sorts of things with intergovernmental relations and so forth. So it's a good deal. It's what we would have signed off on. However, it will require a great deal of financial discipline if it is not to blow up in the city's face.
There's some interesting parallels with people in business who don't pay over their VAT, for instance, or their PAYE in the short term because they think, well, maybe they'll manage their way out of it. So I think the way you've explained it to us is that that's in a metro, or the easiest thing for you, certainly in the past, because Eskom was not applying its muscle in the past. It's a new Eskom that we know today, because it's also hit that golden straitjacket.
You were under pressure of load shedding. People forget that at the beginning of this year still, we had some of the worst load shedding there was, and that makes your repairs and maintenance budget go up as cables blow up and there's heightened wear and tear on your distribution network. So people think, oh, it's load shedding, then you just don't use as much electricity. However, load shedding also causes a great deal of problems for your infrastructure, and income from electricity that you expected to make is not realized while you still have the operational expenditure, the personnel, the maintenance, and so forth. So indeed, as Eskom has gotten its house in order, there's no more load shedding. but it's clearly also far more serious when it comes to enforcing its own rights against municipalities, as it should.
So I don't know how often you talk to your colleagues on the other side of the Boerewors curtain, but it appears as though Johannesburg is also going through something similar with Eskom at the moment, reflecting that Eskom is taking a more concerted approach towards getting its money back. But are you seeing any similarities or any parallels there with what Tshwane is going through?
Absolutely, the trend is the same. Tshane's debt to Eskom is a great deal bigger than Johannesburg. The difference, though, Alec, is that in Tshwane, we were honest about it. We didn't deny that we owed the money. We didn't try and come up with gimmicks. We said, listen, Eskom delivered load shedding. Eskom has been very bad to us. We're stuck in an energy monopoly. So, there are certain market forces that disadvantaged us. So we couldn't go to other suppliers of electricity when load shedding struck, but we owed the money. And what Johannesburg did and continues to do, it seems, is simply to deny that the money is owed. And that places you in a very weak position when you appear before a court of law. There's no sympathy from a judge or a mediator. If clearly you owe the money, but you dispute it because you simply don't want to pay. Johannesburg has got a serious issue with all of the entities there, where I don't think there's proper central control on expenditures. And so, the water crisis has to be managed through Joburg Water. Electricity crisis has to be managed through, Joburg Power or whatever that entity is called. And on each of those boards, you've got cadres and employees who want, to eat from the trough and benefit from the money slushing around there. So I think Joburg is in a very complicated situation. They are in denial. The entities don't make things easier. And I think that, the other disadvantage they have is they don't have a Johan Metler. They don't have a very strong ethical city manager who can make the difficult decisions, even when there's pressure from politicians not to do so.
You've mentioned Mr. Metler a few times. Is his position still secure?
Well, it is for now. The EFF made comments to the effect that they want to get rid of him. But it's not so easy, because he's appointed by the municipal council and he can only be removed by the municipal council. And it's not as easy as just let's vote on removing him. If there are accusations against him, they have to be investigated. And what the EFF has effectively done, and some of the ANC as well, is to strengthen Metler's case if they were to bring anything against him. Because his argument in the Labour Court would be, for example, these folks want to get rid of me because of politics, which is procedurally and substantively unfair. And so I think they're very careful, and maybe they also realize that they need Metler. They need him. They need professional, strong, competent management, because Tshwane's situation is so precarious. If they don't have somebody who is technically strong at the helm, there's really nobody to run the shop. And if you look at the skills base there, I mean, you should listen to the interviews by the deputy mayor, the MMC for finance, and so forth. These folks really don't have a clue what's going on. So they need Metler to keep things together until 2026.
You say 2026. How are you campaigning now for a change at that point? It's still more than a year away, so I guess there must be some kind of a long-term strategy.
Now, the interesting thing is the way that Action SA turned against our multi-party coalition, and I have to stress, it's not just the DA that they betrayed, there's also the Freedom Front Plus, the IFP, and the other parties that were part of that coalition. That really enraged a very big part of the electorate in the city, who felt betrayed, who felt that, they voted for Herman Mashaba to keep the ANC out, not to, in fact, do the exact opposite. And I think that in itself has become a rallying point for many voters. We have made contact with people who've reached out to us to say, how can we help you? How can we help you to get back as mayor? And if you've got an electorate that feels very strongly about something, that is a benefit that you have to use. And my commitment has been, I'll stick around in Tshwane. We'll fight in the city council. We'll make sure that our legacy is protected and that the city is not destroyed. And that is a really strong basis to enter an election campaign. It will be a very strong theme of betrayal and of an opportunity to create some order out of the chaos of coalition politics and to punish some of these spoiler parties who essentially only bring the ANC back to power, even after they've promised not to do so.
And in the meantime, you will travel to places like Thabazimbi and help the overall cause. Well, lovely talking with you today, Cilliers. Thank you for bringing us up to date. Cilliers Brink is the leader of the DA caucus in Tshwane. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.